I gotta be honest, I don't like card games. Deck builders, card battlers, traditional tabletop duels, they don't do anything for me. There's just a disconnect for me in the level of interactivity and a lack of the human element in controlling someone that has a deck of cards to then control those monsters or creatures. I don't know, maybe I just haven't found the right one, but I've never been interested in a card game, with the exception of one. Inscryption is a roguelike deck builder that presents itself through a horror-based atmosphere in a genre-meshing, media-melding story that expands beyond the game you can play. Inscryption is a lot of moving pieces that come together to create a complex, passionate, and absolutely bizarre game that convinced even me, a certified card game hater, to give it a shot and fall in love with its gameplay and story. Inscryption was created by Daniel Mullins. Prior to this release, he was most notably known for developing Pony Island and The Hex, both games also containing complex, self-aware meta-narratives with genre-bending gameplay that led directly into what made Inscryption stand out to me. Mullins created a prototype of Inscryption in 2018 during Ludum Dare's 43rd Game Jam. If you're unfamiliar, Game Jams are timed events where developers try to create games in certain genres or themes for an expression of creativity or just for the love of development. The theme for the jam that brought us Inscryption's creation was Sacrifices Must Be Made, with that concept leading to a gameplay mechanic of allowing the player to use their virtual body parts as points in a card game, and bringing us an early version of Inscryption that you can still check out today. I think it's very cool to see how solid of a tone and idea for the full game was fleshed out in just 48 hours for this game jam. After the public build for that prototype was posted, an audience was born and was showing interest in Mullins expanding the concept into a full game, with a quote from Mullins stating, "Sacrifices Must Be Made was out there, and it was getting very positive feedback. They liked the vibe of the game, the spookiness, and it got more attention than any game jam I had done before, so it kinda made me think I was onto something." So along with the convenient timing of having just wrapped up his work on releasing The Hex, Mullins went all in on creating Inscryption as a full experience, coining the game as an inky black card-based odyssey where you play a lot of cards but also go on a strange adventure. Inscryption is more than a card game in a lot of ways. It is a game about cards at its core, and a pretty fun one at that, for whatever my input on that front is worth, but there's a lot more beneath the surface of the creepy mask of horror and intrigue that the game proudly displays, though I can't say much more without giving away the mystery. Inscryption is an outlier to me, being an oddity in my taste of games, but also an outlier in the medium, mashing together design and storytelling in elaborate and intertwined gameplay. Its conceptualization, further development, and legacy beyond its release has created one of my favorite games in a genre that I don't even like. So, without showing its hand too early, let's talk about Inscryption from the beginning. Talking about Inscryption at length, in detail, is a little difficult without revealing to you what the magic of the game is if you don't already know. So the format of this video is going to be a little different than my usual speed of talking about the game's narrative in one section, the gameplay in another, and so on. Instead, I will be breaking the video up between each act of the game and talking about the gameplay, story, and presentation of the act within its own section. With every act of the game, the entire flow and presentation of the game vastly changes and iterates on itself in new ways with completely different mechanics and genres, though there is an overarching story for us to follow. So while each act might look and play different, we will be following the same thread for the entire journey. This is your spoiler warning, the only one for the entire video. Inscryption is a game best experienced on your own by yourself, but hopefully I can otherwise guide you through the experience thoroughly, or we can reminisce together about what a cool game this was. Let's start with Act 1, deep in the forest, inside a mysterious cabin. Okay, starting the Inscryption video. Booting up Inscryption for the first time greets us with a narration from a formless voice, telling us that it's time to figure out what's in this game. Immediately, we're being forced into something kind of unnatural for games. This isn't a story that we are controlling or a story that we are viewing from a certain character's perspective. As it's being presented to the player here, and what we'll see throughout the entire game, we are watching someone else play Inscryption, making the story almost a second-person experience. A story that we're watching unfold rather than having a direct impact in it or seeing it from a character's viewpoint. The player is not the main character in Inscryption, we're just watching the events that unfolded when someone else played the game, though we do take control in actual gameplay portions to create a video game and not just a non-interactive story, cause, you know, there has to be something to play. And I love this. It's weird and different, and that goes for a lot of what makes Inscryption so unique to me. It has strange ideas and throws them at the wall to just go with whatever sticks, creating memorable moments that we'll see soon and an interesting perception of gameplay for the entire story. So, once we're synced up with controlling the game in our viewing of this playthrough, we're at the main menu. Strangely, we don't have the choice to start a new game, instead forcing the player to continue a save file that already exists in the game. Again, this is just a weird idea to oppose traditional design in games, and I think it's fun. It's something that you might not even think about that lays a foundation for the story later on. Once we finally get to playing the game, we're met with someone obfuscated in the dark, greeting us as a new challenger for his game, then offering to refresh our memory on how to play to let us get started. Inscryption can go pretty long stretches without any narrative progression depending on how well you play the game, and if you're me, then yeah, it'll take a while for us to make some progress. But like I mentioned a moment ago, I also want to contain the gameplay of each act of the game to specific sections of the video. So I'm going to be weaving talking about the progression of the narrative on and off while introducing the game that we're playing and how it develops. So our Game Master introduces us to his game, a card-based tabletop journey that revolves around sacrifices, asking the player to use resource cards, or squirrels, to use their blood to summon creatures to fight our opponents, though we can also sacrifice creature cards to act as resources for even more powerful creatures. Each creature card has a blood value that is required for them to be played on the board, asking for 1 sacrifice per blood point. So, if you play a squirrel and a creature, you can sacrifice both for a total of 2 blood points, allowing you to play a creature card of the same blood value. At the beginning of every encounter, we draw 4 cards, a single resource card, and 3 creature cards randomized from our deck of creatures, with each creature belonging to a specific class like canines, reptiles, or birds. Every turn, we can draw a single card from our resource deck to have more squirrels to sacrifice on the game board for more powerful creatures, or pull a creature card into our hand to have more cards available to play for combat. For each turn that we play, we can place up to 4 cards in a row to attack opposing cards or empty spaces on the game board, again with each card requiring a blood value through sacrifices unless stated otherwise, like the squirrels with no needed blood value to play them. Each card in play has 2 core stats assigned to them, health and damage, how much damage they can take and how much damage that they deal. When we end our turn, our cards will deal damage first, again attacking opposing cards or empty spaces on the game board. If we strike empty spaces, we get points added to our opponent's scale equal to how much damage we dealt, with 5 points on either side of the scale resulting in a win for whoever tipped it all the way down. The scale can go back and forth with continuous damage from both sides, but again, once 5 points outweigh either side, we have a winner. If a card is faced with another directly in front of them on the game board, their damage will be dealt to the card's health, taking down their health until it reaches 0, then taking the card off of the game board for the remainder of the match. As the core of the game that we are playing, I like these rules a lot. They're simple to understand immediately for gameplay, even for someone that doesn't play card games like myself, and thematically, they're giving us a very eerie impression of the Game Master with the world that he's crafted and the game that he wants us to play. And with those basic rules out of the way, our Game Master allows us to continue the story where we had apparently left off, wandering in the forest through a game map that he's created for us. As we walk through the map, we'll come across events and encounters that can change our deck of cards, give us new abilities, and bring us to new fights, but I'll have more on these encounters on the game map soon. As we progress through the game, more mechanics and systems will be introduced to the player for us to learn, but for now, as the Game Master said, our story continues. We continue through the game map and play a few matches against our captor, until suddenly one of our cards, the Stoat, begins speaking to us. The Stoat tells us to continue playing the game while he figures out a plan, asking us to play dumb for a little while longer. When we pull the Stoat into our hand or play him on the game board, he'll occasionally give us information or tips on how to play, including telling us that the Game Master has kept him around for a very long time to make sure that he suffers in his new form as a card. I really like this introduction to something more sinister going on past being held captive in this card game. Something is happening to these cards, something magical and evil. You can feel this energy in how the game is being presented, in how the Game Master speaks to us in punctual yet descriptive language when a card dies, how each card shakes in fear as we begin sacrificing them, and just the general ambiance of the room itself. It's dark, it's creepy, and our entire focus is stuck on the story that the Game Master wants us to hear. I love the entire vibe that Act 1 strikes at. It's moody, it's full of life and death, it really captures something evil beyond your comprehension, and it hints at something larger than what we're initially being shown. Continuing through the game map, we follow a linear path with branching routes that we'll occasionally find encounters through like I mentioned before. These encounters mix up the game and can vastly change a playthrough depending on your luck and knowledge of the game. You'll find things like offers for new cards, allowing you to expand your deck, or campfires which allow you to boost the core stats of a card with the risk of losing the card permanently if you try to boost it too much. One of the more powerful tools that you'll find are sigils, active effects on certain cards that change how they play. Sigils will be given to specific cards, like bird cards almost always getting the flying sigil, though they can be transmuted onto other cards through sacrifice altars found on the game map and a few other means that we'll see soon. Sigils can be very powerful, like the flying sigil that I just mentioned, which allows a card to attack the opponent's scale directly, ignoring any opposing card on the game board. Sigils allow you to strategize and really diversify your deck, especially when you start mixing up what sigils are on which cards at altars. There are a lot of these sigils, and they can range from interesting modifiers to outright overpowered bonuses. It's really fun to discover new ways to exploit them. You can also find usable items on the game map, giving you powerful tools to change the pace of a fight or even just a helping hand when you really need it. At the beginning of the game, you'll always be given 3 items to start with, and once they're used, they're gone for good. But the items that you find on the game map are plentiful, and I appreciate that, so they can be used more loosely, rather than expecting the player to hang on to the item for a critical moment. There's quite a few items in the game. It would take a little too long for me to go over all of them, but there are things like the squirrel in a jar where you can gain an additional resource card on your turn, or the pliers, allowing you to rip out one of your teeth as a point on your opponent's scale. The addition of items lets gameplay feel much more dynamic. Like I said, the entire flow of a fight can change if you play the right item, especially some of the more powerful ones like the paper fan, which allows you to deal damage directly to an opponent's scale with all of your active cards, rather than having to damage opposing ones to open up the game board. I really like how they're included as something to constantly exploit, again, rather than something to clutch to for that perfect moment. Eventually, while we're making good progress on the game map, our game master decides that we might be moving too quickly, placing us in a fight that we're forced to lose. The stoat in our deck comments on this, saying that the game master has no care for the rules and our host tells the card to be quiet, which I think is a really interesting development. He can hear what we're being told, but he's not necessarily doing anything about it. He just wants to keep playing his card game. With our forced defeat, the game master wants to introduce us to a new rule, giving us a limited number of lives in gameplay and also opening us up to the rest of his cabin when he asks us to go grab a candlestick nearby. Now we're allowed to explore our prison, a small single room inside of a wooden cabin, lit carefully by dim candles throughout. Around the room we can find a few things to interact with, a couple of simple puzzles to gain items and benefits to our card game, but also ways to progress the narrative to escape captivity, along with some secrets to drastically change how the game can be played that I won't reveal here to take away from that mystery. I really enjoy this shift in perspective. It's jarring at first, and the fixed camera angles are a little finicky to navigate the small room, but it's a really cool moment to see the rest of where we're being held. And I like the little puzzles we can find. They're simple enough that you can brute force through them, but they'll only take a few moments to solve, and the benefits that they give are worthwhile for a little exploration, like free cards or more teeth as currency. More on that in a bit. For now though, let's get back to the table with the candles. Like I said, we now have limited lives in the card game. 2 candles to represent 2 mistakes that we're allowed to make. If both candles go out, the game is over and we're forced to start from the beginning. And yes, I do mean from the very beginning. We will lose all of our cards and the progress we've made on the game map, with few exceptions to some meta progression. Inscryption is a roguelike, expecting you to progress through the game in multiple attempts with different playthroughs that change depending on your cards, your items, and the paths you take on the game map and more. I'm not the biggest fan of roguelikes, if I'm being completely honest. I really struggle with replaying a game immediately after I've beaten it, and that's kind of the whole point of the genre. But Inscryption uses the roguelike formula only in its first act, and there is constant meta progression, meaning progression that happens regardless of having to reset. So I don't mind it here, especially since once we win, we get to move on to something else entirely and continue with a linear story. With our life now on the line, the Game Master wants to introduce us to boss fights, difficult card battles with unique rule sets against specific classes of enemies, like canine cards or aquatic cards. The boss fights are a lot of fun, and I want to talk about each of them in detail as we come across them, but I do really like all of them. Each boss fight gets a specific music track for the fight, the entire environment around the game board changes visually, the Game Master puts on a new mask and takes on a different persona. It's really fun, and it helps sell the tabletop aesthetic that our captor is trying to put on for for us. The first phase of the Prospector focuses around the Pack Mule card that he plays, a card that moves between lanes on the board but deals no damage to the player. If the player is able to kill the mule, we're given 5 cards immediately added to our hand and permanently added to our deck for the rest of this attempt. The mule is technically optional to kill, but as it moves around on the board, it can be annoying when it blocks damage that would otherwise be going to the scale. The second phase of the fight can be pretty difficult. Once you've dealt 5 points of damage to tip the Prospector's scale, he strikes out at any cards that you have in play and turns them into gold nugget cards, which deal no damage and cannot be destroyed until they're killed by opponents. The goal here is to try and play as few cards as possible in the first phase to make sure that you have a lane or 2 open for the next one, to ensure that you're not entirely blocked from playing once he changes your cards. I like this transition a lot. It's a really unexpected move the first time you encounter him, and it's subtly teaching you not to overplay your hand too early, showing you that there is value in holding off for more powerful cards if you can wait. Once we've defeated the Prospector, our Game Master returns to normal and brings us to a new game map, bringing us to the Wetlands, a new area with another boss fight waiting for us at the end. We're also awarded a rare card for defeating the boss, a card with unique sigils or gameplay modifiers, like the Gek card that can be played without any sacrifices, or the Ouroboros card that can be killed in combat infinitely and always returns to your hand as a more powerful version of itself. With most of the rare cards, the sigils on the cards are not tied to them, meaning that you can use them at sacrifice altars to mix and match with regular cards to create new monsters, which I think is really fun. There's a degree of a growing power fantasy throughout the wacky cards that you can create. Continuing through the Wetlands, the next time that we pull the Stoat from our creature deck, he tells us that he knows there's a way out for us hidden somewhere inside of our cabin, and the Game Master again tells him to be quiet. If we take a look around, we can eventually find a rulebook containing all the sigils and what they do in gameplay. On one page, we also find a combination for a safe inside of the room, and when we input the combo, we find another sentient card, the Stink Bug, excited to see us and asking if we've met the Stoat or the Stunted Wolf. Continuing that, together, they have to end this madness. The safe also has a key inside that lets us play some more puzzles to unlock more cards like the Worker Ant and Queen Ant, the Caged Wolf, and a Skink, along with a wood carving that we'll be very interested in soon. Once both the Stoat and Stink Bug are drawn in our hand together, they have a chance to speak. The Stoat doesn't seem very excited to see the Stink Bug, remarking that he pretty much had to tell us how to find her and asking if she still has a plan. The Stink Bug says that she does, but they'll need their other friend, which the Stoat reluctantly agrees with. As we trek across the game board, we'll eventually come across the Wood Carver, a friendly but quiet face that wants to give us a helping hand, offering a carving that will modify specific classes of cards, giving us totems. Totems are extremely powerful tools that are active in any card fight for the player, as long as you have a body and a head to combine into one single totem. You can choose a head or body for the totem every time you encounter the Wood Carver, so it requires you to see her at least twice if you want to create a totem, except for the carving we just found. The carving we got earlier was of a squirrel head, meaning we can now add a sigil to our squirrel cards for the rest of this attempt, and we'll always have the squirrel head to start totems with. I think it might be a beginner trap, but I really like adding the 3 blood sigil to the squirrels, making them worth 3 blood points to be able to play pretty much any card out of my deck with just one single squirrel card. But you can mix and match heads and bodies for some fun combinations, like swift birds that move across the game board every turn, or poison canines that always kill cards in one hit. The totem is great, and it again just adds to more dynamic gameplay to keep things fresh. And speaking of, once we have unlocked totems, so has the Game Master. He employs totems himself for specific fights that we can see on the game board, giving us a more difficult encounter when he modifies an entire class of cards in his deck. Again, this is adding to more emergent gameplay and more ways for us to think and strategize with the cards. It can be really tough when he pulls out a totem, and it's very satisfying to eke out a win from a strong combination. Eventually, throughout the Wetlands, we'll find our next boss, the Angler, a rancid-smelling man with a deck focused around the fish that he's caught. His main gimmick is stealing the card that you've most recently played every other turn. With his fishhook, he'll be able to pull your cards onto his side of the board and make it fight against you. It sucks in the best way possible. It's really fun to try and think of which cards would be beneficial to lose and how you can manipulate your placement to make him steal worse cards. In his second phase, he places the Chum Bucket cards in front of any active card on your side, and when any of those Chum Bucket cards are destroyed, they're replaced with a Great White card, a high damage dealing card with the Waterborne sigil, making them very difficult to hit and kill. The play here is to try and bait out Chum Bucket cards in as few lanes as possible to be able to deal big damage to the scale once the Great White cards are active, because they will hit hard and destroy anything in front of them. Alternatively, you can place something big and beefy in front of the Chum Buckets to then tank the Great White damage and persist damage past them, but I think it's a lot safer to try and keep open lanes. I like the Angler fight a lot. His primary mechanic of stealing cards is fun to learn how to counter, and the second phase raises the stakes with a mad dash to deal enough damage before the Great Whites wipe you out. Unfortunately, this fight is rigged if you've made it this far on your first playthrough. The first time I played Inscryption, I struggled a bit with the mechanics and didn't see this before, so this was really cool to see for the recording of this video. Essentially, the Game Master decides that we're making too much progress too quickly in his game and floods the boards with extremely powerful cards to make sure that we lose before we can actually beat the Angler. I like this for two reasons. One, I really like that it's being reinforced that the Game Master isn't above bending the rules for his game that he wants to play. And two, I think it's a good way to remind the player and steer them back into the main narrative progression that we should be pursuing in escaping the cabin. It's easy to get lost in the game that we're playing, and that's a good thing. The atmosphere, the card gameplay, the strategizing, and theory crafting, it's all really fun, but I'm glad the game knows when to pull us back on track to progress the bigger picture. So, the Game Master forces us to lose, resulting in him killing the player personally in a room behind a previously locked door. Before we die, he wants to take our picture to capture us as a card, allowing the player to choose between 3 different cards in our deck to create a death card, an amalgamation of health and damage, blood cost, and sigils at our discretion. I love the death cards. They can get ridiculous and break the game, like creating a card with the health and damage of a grizzly, along with a 0 cost of a Gek that does trifurcated attacks to hit 3 different spots on the board, totaling to 12 damage on a card that costs nothing to play. I didn't make anything like that in this playthrough, unfortunately. I didn't die very often. Yes, I am bragging. But trust me, the more cards you have, the more chance you'll have in creating a crazy death card if you fail the run. You also get to name the death card, which I think is fun, but I'm woefully uncreative with names, so say hello to Poison Gavin. With our death, we're greeted back at the table as a new challenger, though with some of the tools from the challenger that came before us, like the Angler's Hook, a new item that we'll always start with that allows us to steal cards like he does. And since we've died, the Game Master decides that it's time to learn about Bone Tokens, another resource that will be used to play specific bone cards. Bone Tokens are created when a card that we play dies in any way, in sacrifices or in combat, so they can be accumulated reliably in a match. They're also spent at the end of a match, so you'll want to play them fast and heavy if you can, letting you double the output of cards you can play if you think ahead with the tokens and sacrifices. I like the bone tokens. I think they're pretty easy to understand along with the blood values, and they introduce a new level of strategy with bone cards. So while it might be getting a little overwhelming with multiple card resources, I think once you've played a few bone cards, you'll understand how it works. As we begin our new run through the game, the next thing we need to do to progress is find the 3rd sentient card. To do so, we need to play the Caged Wolf card that we can find in puzzles hidden inside the cabin, letting that card die in combat and breaking the cage that's drawn on the card. Once that card dies in combat, the Caged Wolf is freed and a regular wolf card is added to your deck. Poking around the cabin after freeing the wolf card reveals that a wolf statue in the room has broken out of a similar cage, with us now being able to move the statue onto a weighted pedestal, freeing an ornate dagger from a wooden hand's grasp. I don't really know how you're meant to figure this step out, honestly. The Game Master does comment on the card when you find it, so maybe that's the hint you need to then play it in combat, but as a card, it seems to do nothing but act as a damage blocker, essentially being a worthless, high blood value card. You do get a vision if you die too many times without making progress to this step. Don't ask me how I know that in my 3rd playthrough of this game, so I do think that even Mullins himself would admit that this step might be a little too obtuse. With the Ornate Dagger, we have a new item to play in card fights, allowing us to cut out our eyeball and place it on the scale for 4 points worth of damage, heavily obscuring our vision but giving us an extra push if we needed a win. And if we win that fight after poking out our eye, the Game Master offers us a new one in place of it to make it fair for us to continue playing. There's a very obviously magical eye that he's offering us, and you can choose to ignore it to take a regular one, but to progress, let's take the weird green one. As the chest full of eyes is shut in front of us, a message is revealed to us in invisible paint, telling us to search the cuckoo clock in the room. Taking a look at the clock, there's markings to show us where to position each hand, and when we line it all up, we're rewarded with the 3rd sentient card, the Stunted Wolf, who tells us to take the film roll hidden behind his card. The Game Master gets impatient with us speaking to the wolf, so we get back to playing his game. With our 3 new friends, we can get a little further in the Game Master's journey, and we find ourselves at the 3rd boss, the Trapper. The Trapper can be found throughout the game map before the boss fight as the Trader, offering us pelts in exchange for teeth that we've earned through dealing more damage than needed to win fights, which I think is an interesting layer to your strategy, knowing you can earn currency if you push your attacks past what you need to win. These pelts are used for a mechanic in the Trapper fight, but are otherwise clutter in your deck that can be played without blood or bones but deal no damage. So, back to the Trapper as a boss fight. Their first phase consists of trapped cards, cards which, when killed, immediately kill whatever card attacked them, though giving the player pelts directly in their hand for the death. I really dislike these cards. It feels like there's no winning against them, but maybe I'm just missing something and there's an obvious way to exploit them. with the pelts that we've either bought along the way or that were given to us during this fight. In the Trapper's second phase, he forces us to trade pelts with him to exchange for heavily modified cards, leaving any cards that we don't buy on the board for us to fight against. I do think this is interesting, and I can understand that the trapped cards in phase 1 could have been created to make sure that the player has some pelts for this phase, but again, I really don't like how unfair it feels to lose to these cards for no real reason. The second phase can either be really rough or be won in just one attack phase, depending on how well you look ahead at what cards are coming into play, and how familiar you are with the sigils and how they'll be acting. It's kind of a knowledge check in a way, to see if you're retaining what these cards will do and how the fight is going to progress, which is very satisfying to me. I like the second phase a lot, even if it becomes a bloody fight to the end with some powerful cards on each side. The Trapper is my least favorite boss though with that first phase. I just don't like how meaningless it feels to sacrifice cards at the beginning, but again, I get it if there had to be a way to get the player a few pelts. The second phase is a lot of fun with overpowered cards all over, and like I said, it's a great way to test your knowledge of the sigils and flow of combat. At any point during the run, once the Stunted Wolf and Stoat card are drawn together, they'll speak to each other, with the Wolf telling the Stoat that he set up a way to reset once again, though it falls to the hands of the player to get us to the next step with the use of the film roll, which means we need to get all the way to the end of the game in just one life, beating all 3 bosses without making any more than 2 mistakes at a time. It's pretty difficult, honestly. I think the first time I played through Inscryption, the first act took me 5 or 6 hours to complete, though now that I understand the game better and have played through it twice now, this act only took me about 2 hours with the mandatory death and some bad plays that cost me another reset. The difficulty of Inscryption is weird to gauge with its hard numbers-based mechanics that revolve around a bit of randomization in your card pulls and what happens through traveling through the game map. You can get great top deck pulls every fight and breeze your way through each encounter, building strong cards with multiple sigils, or you can have that same exact deck and constantly pull cards that you can't afford the blood cost of, or that are just plain weaker than what you're fighting. I do think there's a little bit of tweaking in what cards you pull initially to make sure you can always afford one card at the start of a fight, but that card isn't always going to be very good, so you can really just get stuck in a loop of bad pulls, along with any potential misunderstanding you might have of the mechanics while learning, which can lead to frustration with the entire game. I don't really know what my point is in bringing up the difficulty, honestly. It's entirely random, and you can have great luck or bad luck, which might be where this frustration comes from. Despite knowing how the cards work, knowing how the game flows, and knowing how to leverage sigils, you can still just get bad pulls and lose it all, which is never very fun. I know that's just kind of how it goes with card mechanics, and trying to balance the entire experience for something consistent would detract from the core of the card gameplay, but I don't know. I guess it's just a holdover from my dislike of card games in general. So your mileage will vary with getting to the final boss. It could be as simple as meeting all of the requirements and walking through the fights, or it could be a 12-hour-long struggle. Either way, the core of the game is still really fun and a great foundation that I don't mind replaying all that much. Once we do reach the final boss, we're in for something truly special. As we approach the end of the final game map with the cabin at its helm, our perspective shifts to that of our game token, changing to a first-person view of our walk into the cabin through the woods. This moment is nothing short of magical. It's a cinematic shift to set the tone for a grand finale to this wonderfully weird and creepy escape room. Finally, we're getting out of the cabin and we're going to face the man that we've been playing against. The Game Master looms over the game board, covering the massive pink moon in the distance to tell us that he's excited to face us, that he hasn't had a worthy opponent in a long time. As we walk through the woods, his hand comes down to offer us one final boon, an offering if we can pass a trial of our choosing. Some of these trials are on the game map throughout our journey as cave encounters, asking us to draw 3 random cards from our deck, and if they meet a specific criteria, like having more than 5 health combined, we pass and get a new card with multiple sigils. The trials for the final boss fight are a lot of the same, with a few unique trials for added challenge. The rewards for the trial though can be detrimental to you winning this final fight, giving you insane bonuses like the boon of the magpie, allowing you to search through your entire deck every time you draw a creature card and then add that card to your hand. I think this is great for the finale. It rewards the player for being familiar with their deck, and it gives you a chance to meet the final boss's power in a way. As our player token enters the cabin, our perspective comes back to the player facing the Game Master at the table. Now the lights come on, showing us a disheveled, bony old man covered in twigs and leaves, excited to begin the final fight that he has planned for us. He extinguishes one of our candles and grabs a third for himself, giving this fight 3 phases in total. The first phase has the Game Master cycling the 3 bosses we face throughout our journey on each of his turns, playing the Trapper's Gold Rush, the Angler's Hook Steel, and giving us a pelt as the Trapper to trade for sigil-infused cards that will be played against us. I do think it's fun to have a mini boss rush included here, and I think it's great to push the player into facing all 3 of these difficult mechanics together, but I do feel a little cheated with the boss mechanics being recycled for this first phase. Thankfully, the next two make up for it. In the second phase, the Game Master reveals to us that he'll be using any death cards we've created against us, using whatever freak combinations we came up with to punish us. Again, I didn't die too much for this recording, so unfortunately he had to pull out some pre-made death cards for this fight, but this moment was powerful for me the first time I played through the game since I was actively trying to make some devious cards. This is a great trick on the player. Compounded with him still using the mechanics of previous bosses, the second phase can be extremely difficult, but I love that the death cards are being turned against you. Unfortunately for the Game Master, I had a pretty powerful row in play, so this phase went by quickly in this playthrough, though that does not understate how great of a moment it is in a run of the game. And unfortunately for him again, I kinda ruined the third phase for him too. As we enter the final phase of the fight, the Game Master looks to the moon behind him and captures it with his camera, placing the moon on the game board with a massive health pool with a sigil that deals damage to all of your cards and one that removes your resource cards from the board, all while blocking airborne attacks to force you to have to break through the moon. It's a tough card to crack, and it is a very cool moment to see the Game Master again break his rules to try and win at any cost, stealing the entire moon for his final gambit. But I had a card with poison attack, so I killed it in one hit. And I kinda love that. I love that the game is okay with me exploiting the sigils to my favor and winning the final boss fight. This big epic sequence in one attack. It doesn't punish me at all or pull me out of the moment, it lets me have that win, and I think that's great. The final fight with the Game Master is fantastic. The stakes constantly rise, the aggression he has in combat, the way he tries to cheat at the very end. It's also fun and exciting that it makes for one of the most memorable sequences that I've ever played in a game. I love this fight, I love the way I broke it, and I love seeing the ways other people have broken it even worse. With the moon destroyed, the Game Master quietly tells us that we still have to finish him off. I really enjoy that all the fluff, the music, the extra effects in the environment, it all fades away once he realizes that he's lost. There's a fantastic level of storytelling in the visuals and effects alone that would be worth an entire video itself, so I hope that I can give praise for it when it might fit into the script nicely, but as a whole, this game looks fantastic with very inspired art direction, just to get that out there. As the Game Master is defeated, our victory is cut short by the voice from the beginning of the game excitedly exclaiming that he beat the boss, seemingly knocking over his camera that's been recording his entire playthrough. We're shown the boot up screen for a camera and are greeted with 8 video files stored on the camera's memory card, letting us piece together who exactly is playing Inscryption. I am obsessed with the shift in the tone, the perspective, and the medium that we're being presented. It completely strikes away at the excitement of beating the final boss and tells you no, there's more and you're only cracking the surface, and it's about to get a lot more weird. I'm gonna take each of these video files one by one to go through each of them. Some of them are a lot longer than others and some are more interesting, just kinda how it goes, but this is one of the largest parts of the overarching story in the game, finding out who is playing Inscryption and why. The first video is just a short gag. Our protagonist is setting up his camera and realizes that he's accidentally started recording. The next video introduces us to the man himself, Luke Carter, calling himself the Lucky Carter as he begins filming a video for his card-based YouTube channel, a video of him opening a pack of cards. Luke puts on a bit of a persona to seem more exciting for his audience. I could probably use a lesson from him in that regard, but we do see some of himself in editing notes that's left in the footage, a more subdued and maybe self-conscious guy. The third video is where things start to pick up and start to make sense for us. Luke is filming another pack opening video, this time with the limited print of Inscryption, a card game that only printed one run of cards in the 90s and never sold them again. Luke tells us that he managed to grab the cards at a garage sale and excitedly says that some of the cards might be worth a bit of money, even if no one plays the game today. The first pack he opens isn't very special, but he pulls out a card we haven't seen before, a blue mage, but otherwise the pack is unimportant. As Luke begins to open the second booster pack, he notices that the packaging looks to have been resealed, hoping no one took the rare card out of this set. As he looks through the cards, he notices coordinates written down on one, reading them out loud and remarking that he thinks those coordinates are pretty close to him. Luke gets up from his seat and rushes to turn off the camera. In the next video, we see Luke out in the woods with some equipment to show that he's ready to look for whatever might be at the coordinates, but the video gets cut off with some corruption. The next video is entirely corrupted and has nothing discernible in it. The sixth file picks up where the last one left off, with Luke saying that he's glad he brought a spare battery and continues towards where the coordinates should be. Reaching the spot, Luke pokes his shovel into the dirt and finds a small box beneath the surface, pulling out a floppy disk of Inscryption from inside. Luke rushes away from the spot, seemingly a little spooked by the discovery, and quickly shuts off his camera. The next file shows Luke purchasing a floppy disk reader and joking that this recording was a waste of time. The final video we can watch begins with the same line we heard from Luke when we initially booted the game, saying it's time to figure out what's on this thing, reaching the main menu and syncing up with the beginning of the game and catching us up to where our viewing began as Luke drags a card into the continue save slot on the main menu, just like we did. Again, I really love these videos. It deepens the narrative that's been going on in the background this entire time. You might have even forgot about it until Luke commented on a play you made, or until the moment following the boss fight, and it brings us into a larger mystery for us to come along with. It's really cool and really fun that it uses a completely different medium, using vlog-style videos to present a unique narrative for a video game. I also really enjoy Luke Carter as a character. Kevin Saxby nails the role of a goofy, over-the-top YouTube personality, but we'll see more of his character and this performance as we continue. As we enter the camera's interface, Luke begins a new recording and we sync back up with the game we were playing right alongside him, right where we left off with our celebration for winning the game. The Game Master rewards us with a gross pile of something, and despite our win, he still plans to kill us and make a death card. As we're taken into the side room like before, the camera is left on a shelf beside us and we snatch it, loading up the film reel that we stole into the camera and taking a picture of the Game Master, capturing him in a card and seemingly distorting reality we're in as a bright, seemingly radiating card appears in the room with us. We're now expected to head back to the main menu and begin a new save file, with that card in the room unlocking the option to start a new game. I think this is a fun little fourth wall break and a very clever use of the new game button, and you'll see why in just a second. As we place the new game card into the menu slot, a command prompt appears on screen and seemingly wipes the disk of its data, with the disk overwriting the game we were playing with a previous restore point and referencing something called the old data on the disk, though being unable to completely boot the old data. As the restore point is written back onto the disk, we enter Act 2. Before we begin the act, I do want to summarize my thoughts on the opening of the game and Act 1 as a whole. To keep it brief, I love it. It creates a fantastic atmosphere with its visuals and music, engaging puzzles with a mystery to solve while wrapping itself up in a simple but fun card game that is approachable for someone that dislikes or has no real prior knowledge to similar games. Act 1 is fantastic and a strong way to start a twisted and wild journey that the rest of the game throws us into. So without any more delay, let's begin Act 2. Come on, Prospector death? It's supposed to be the easiest fight. Well, at least I can cut it and pretend it never happened. Immediately on beginning Act 2, the first thing you'll notice is a complete shift in presentation, changing the art style to reflect the age of the game that Luke found, throwing us back to the 90s with a 16-bit look. I think this is a lot of fun and it creates a unique moment for a first playthrough. We're getting hit back to back with new forms of media to give us a slow burn of the story and how much larger of a game that we're playing. Just to get it out of the way at the top here, the pixel art looks great. The overworld is charming and nails the exact vibe they were shooting for with RPG games of the era. The portraits of characters that we meet are detailed and expressive, the game board translates well to this art style, and the art for the cards do too. It all looks pristine and it feels like there was a lot of care to make sure it felt right, which I think it does. As we boot up the game for the first time, we're greeted with an opening narration of the world in Inscryption. Not the cabin we were just in before, but a much larger space. The narration explains that a long time ago, the world existed without cards. Then, the scribes arrived, each scribe having their own method of capturing life and putting them to cards, like we've seen with the camera used for death cards. We're introduced to each scribe, getting a name for our game master, Leshy, and his peers, Grimora, Poe, and Magnificus. The four scribes had absolute power until one day, a challenger, the player, arrived to take one of their places. This is a complete tonal shift along with the visuals, but I think I like it. It's definitely tapping into openings of older games, again trying to emulate those old titles, and I think it works, but it's a bit of a stretch to expect the same person that was drawn into the creepy atmosphere of Act 1 to buy into this retro grand adventure that we're starting. It creates a divide in what we expected when starting the game and what we have to play now, which can be off-putting to a lot of players, understandably, but bear with me, the entire journey is worth our time even if it starts to feel a little unserious or melodramatic. To begin, we must pick a deck to represent the scribe that we want to replace, giving us an option between all four scribes, each with different mechanics to their decks. So yes, there are 4 card games running at once here, but I'm going to try to space them out as we come across them to keep the explanations from overflowing the script. For this playthrough, I picked Leshy's deck since it's the one that we are familiar with and his mechanics stay mostly the same for Act 2. I imagine most players would pick Leshy since, like me, it's what they're comfortable with, but you can pick any of the 4. You get some unique dialogue depending on your choice, but all 4 card packs will become available to us as we progress through the act, letting us see each and use them if we so choose. With our starter pack in hand, we have to build our deck. In Act 2, you have to manually choose 20 cards to have as your main deck for play in combat, no longer having separate decks for resources and creatures. Now we'll have to balance the deck between both. You can automatically generate a deck if you don't feel like thinking about it too much, but I do think this is a fun change of pace, especially when you get cards from other sets to give your deck some variety. Unfortunately, I don't really like any of the other decks. I do play a few cards from Grimora's set, but her mechanics are the simplest next to Leshy's, so it's easy to get some synergy between them. Again, more on the other decks soon, let's keep moving with the story. We leave the Scribe Monoliths, I guess that's the name I'm going with, and exit to the overworld, letting us see all 4 Scribe temples across the world map. Don't worry, it's not actually a world map with a 30-hour long campaign, random encounters, and XP grinds to a max level. It's just a couple of brief locations. We head to Leshy's cabin, the setting for his temple, and we speak to the Scribe of the Beasts in a very familiar room. He calls our ambition to replace him laughable and tells us that if we want to face him, we'll have to take down his friends in the woods to prove that we're worth his time. Leshy gives us a camera to take some pictures throughout the forest to show his friends things they'd like to see to unlock their fights, like a photo of the prospector's missing dog, a big fish for the angler, and a photo of Pelt for the trapper. Getting these pictures requires us to do some quick environmental puzzles. One is literally just looking at numbers on the floor, but they're painless so they don't halt your progression or anything. I guess I would have just liked a little more meat to these ones since there are better puzzles later on. And speaking of, the formula here for unlocking 3 opponents through some puzzles, fighting them, then facing the Scribe in a final battle is what we'll be pursuing for the rest of Act 2. Every fight in the temple focuses on training you on how the Scribe's cards work to get you ready for their boss fight, which is good because they're very mechanically different from each other on top of unique components to each final fight. I think this is fine. It's again kind of trying to build off of design in older games, but it might start to feel repetitive once you finish the second temple. Let's get into an actual fight with our beast deck. Fighting in Leshy's temple with Leshy's cards should feel very familiar. It's the same cards you know and the same progression of sacrificing cards for more powerful ones and having to hit empty spaces to add points to our opponent's scale. Though again, now we have to mix drawing our resource cards and creature cards. I think this can be a bit of a pain point with Act 2 because now, even more than before, you really are a victim to the randomness of your deck. If you keep pulling creatures you can't afford with the resources you have, yeah, sucks. Keep drawing and keep taking damage until you can make a play. Oh, and when you draw all 20 of your cards because of that constant bad luck, starvation will set in and get progressively more powerful to end the fight. This was a mechanic in Act 1 too, but I think starvation only appears when you run out of resource cards, which is a lot easier to manage against having to keep an eye on your whole deck of 20 cards. Obviously, there's a solution here to have more resource cards in your deck or have more low-cost cards than higher ones. But with your 20 starter cards, this can really hurt and can make Act 2 feel much more difficult. Thankfully, there isn't a progression reset like Act 1 when you fail a fight, you can just try again until you win, which I think is a good thing because there will likely be a lot of trial and error before you find a deck that works for you. Finding and building that better deck is pretty easy though with all of the free card packs to find throughout the world, and the ability to buy cards from traders with foils, the new currency for when you deal over damage in a fight. Once you have a deck that balances your resources and decent creatures to play in combat, I think Act 2 is much more enjoyable and can even be a bit unbalanced in your favor if you get good pulls from your deck, ending fights in a single turn. Again, it's a weird balance to difficulty just like Act 1 because there is a randomness variable to consider, so I can't slight the game too much for the beginning of the act being so grueling, but I do think it's worth mentioning because it can definitely steer a player away from the game if they think this is what the next 6 hours are going to be when compared against what Act 1 was. And if you're wondering now, no, Act 2 is not 6 hours long, it's actually pretty short. Getting back to the actual fight, I don't have much to add with Leshy's Temple. It's the same game we were playing in Act 1, but now you can delete cards in your row if you want to, which I do appreciate. So with all 3 of Leshy's pals down, we get to fight the Scribe again. In this form, his fight focuses on death cards like before, though now creating a death card in the middle of a match based on which 3 cards die first in combat, stealing their blood cost, stats, and sigils. In Phase 2, he reveals this death card and forces it onto the player, deleting what's currently in our hand and giving us the death card that he created. This can go both ways. You can create something really powerful for yourself in play, or you can create an entirely useless card that you now have to suffer through. You can of course try to strategize a bit with what cards die in what order, but I don't have the brain capacity for all that. I got lucky and the cards I was able to play on the board just ripped through the fight, and it was over before he could even get data to create death cards, again giving me a new sequence that I haven't seen before. I think this mechanic for Leshy's boss fight is fun, but very imbalanced, making for a really fun surprise or a painful punishment depending on what dies in the encounter. With Leshy down, his temple is complete and we're shown that his scribe monolith is now shining a big beacon of light. Leshy congratulates us for a good fight, lamenting that it was over too quickly for him to enjoy it, but sending us off to the next scribe along with 2 packs of his cards. Thanks, man. As we leave, another scribe, Poe, enters to gloat to Leshy that he's not surprised that we beat him and mentions that things would have been back to normal a lot sooner if the disc wasn't lost, referring to the disc that Luke found and is now playing. Poe leaves and we're now free to pursue the other 3 scribes in any order. So let's start with Grimora, scribe of the dead, who captures life through writing their epitaphs. Like I mentioned before, pursuing each scribe has us follow a similar pattern, 3 fights unlocked by completing some puzzles for a final fight with the scribe. Grimora's temple has us picking up pieces of an epitaph to complete 3 gravestones for 3 lost souls, the most notable being a grave for Casey Hobbs, a fairly recent death of a 22-year-old in the 1990s, while the other 2 deaths are from the 18th century. I think this puzzle is fun and simple with a good helping of personality. Talking to each dead person gives you a little clue on which gravestone might belong to them by relating to their mannerisms, their portraits, or what they have to say to you about how they died or when. It's cute, it's easy, and I like it. The 3 fights here will teach us how to approach Grimora's deck if we want to use it ourselves, and I do because again, it meshes well with Leshy's beast cards. Grimora's cards all revolve around bone tokens, the resource that we already learned how to use in Act 1, so integrating them into a beast deck is pretty natural. If you've forgotten or aren't paying too much attention while this is on your second monitor, bone tokens are given to the player for every death that happens on their side of the board, from sacrifices or death in combat, so it's easy to rack them up and play them often along with beast cards, making these 2 card packs work very well together. Her pack also has cards that generate even more bone tokens, like the Gravedigger card that gives you a free token each turn even without a death, so you can rapidly build the resource like you might with certain beast cards and their blood values. As we fill the final gravestone, the stones lower into the ground to let us approach Grimora, who seems excited about fighting us, though lets us know that we will not win the fight. For Grimora's fight, her gimmick focuses around bringing back cards that have died in combat, bringing her cards back after 2 turns when you kill them. I think this is a fun trick to try and work around, but not very effective, since you can force her to keep playing the same weaker cards over and over, getting the upper hand on her next plays. In her second phase, she spins the death cards onto the player, killing what's currently in play on our side of the board and giving them back as corpses. Cards that have no bone cost or blood value but are much weaker than their original forms with no damage output. I like this trick a lot more. It's a switch up on the player to make you think on your feet, but the corpse cards still have value in being damage sponges to let you form a new plane of attack. And for this playthrough, her second phase trick kind of broke the fight for me. She gave me corpse cards of the Field Rat card, which, when played, gives you a copy of the card immediately in your hand. It's a decent card with 2 health and 2 damage, though it costs 2 blood points to play, so it can be tricky to get onto the field, except when it's a corpse card. Thanks to Grimora, I had an infinitely generating card that absorbed damage and allowed me to sacrifice it for higher blood cost cards, creating a constant loop of blood for strong cards and an unending defense against her attacks. It was a really fun surprise to realize the mistake that mechanic had made in making my deck unbeatable. So maybe I'm softer on this boss gimmick because it created a memorable moment for me, but I think as a whole, it stands on its own as a fun trick to make you strategize on the fly. As Grimora is defeated, she expresses some disappointment and surprise in her loss, but gives the player a piece of information, telling us that we will be able to change our minds later about which scribe we want to succeed, adding that she hopes that we spare her in our decision. And while we try to leave the second scribe's temple, the battery on Luke's camera dies, and once it's replaced, we're greeted with the onboard memory card, letting us poke through his previous recordings again. It's about to get a lot freakier, so strap in. The first file shows Luke reading back an email that he's written to GameFuna, the publishers of the original Inscryption card game that only had 1 release of cards in the 90s. In his email, he asks them if they have any additional information about the Inscryption video game, saying that he can't find anything online about it and that he found the game buried near his house. The next file is much of the same, though this time Luke is recording a video to ask his audience if they know anything about the digital game. He tells his audience that he might have the only known physical copy of the game and tells them that it's pretty weird, but avoids mentioning specifics in case of any legal action from GameFuna. As the video ends, Luke tries to ask another question, but the footage corrupts and cuts the audio, displaying a message in the captions in binary, translating to Karnoffel code. This is the first real hint to something bigger than what's inside the game we can play, giving us what I think is the first peek into the ARG, or alternate reality game, that Inscryption hides within itself. If you're unfamiliar with ARGs, they're a form of interactive storytelling between a creator and an audience, asking the audience to solve cryptic puzzles in various forms of media to reveal more information about the story that's been crafted. There's been a few clues of something deeper inside the game, like the mention of the old data when the disc reformatted, but this is the first clue that I'm aware of that asks you to look for information outside of what's in the game immediately, though feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I also want to mention the existence of the Inscryption ARG because I'm not sure if it's something I'll cover here on the channel. I really just want to focus on the game itself, though I do appreciate the deeper level of storytelling that the game has with the ARG, even if it does go to some weird and silly places. But it's a lot, and it would take someone a lot smarter than me to crack it and break it down in a cohesive way to understand for a video. So I will be linking a video going in depth on the ARG in the description if following a rabbit hole of evil, twisted software development interests you. I promise there's plenty more weird shit for us to get into with the game itself, so let's continue. The next video we can watch is Luke reading out an email response from GameFuna. They message back claiming that there never was a video game made for Inscryption and tell Luke to send them the disc or they'll be forced to pursue legal action against him, to which Luke exclaims about for the camera. The next video is corrupted, but the one following it picks up the pace of the story quite a bit. Luke begins the video setting up a camera near his front door, saying that a woman is outside of his house and that Luke believes she's from GameFuna. He tells us that she came to his door yesterday and he avoided her, but today he wants to record what happens when he speaks to her. Answering the door, the woman introduces herself, but the footage corrupts for a moment, even displaying redacted on screen, though the subtitles display another message in binary, this one translating to presumably her name, Amanda. The footage cuts back into Amanda asking about a floppy disk for Inscryption. She says that she was told that Luke has a copy and he denies having the game, pretending to not know what Inscryption is at all. Amanda presses him on this, reading back his email to GameFuna and confirming his full name and YouTube alias. Luke again tries to say that while that is his name, that isn't his email account, and then asking Amanda how he found out where he lives, and further asking how she got past the locked gate in front of his home. Amanda avoids the questions and gives Luke a card with her phone number, telling him to give her a call if he wants to talk more about Inscryption. I really like this development in the story. Obviously, something is up with the game with it resetting itself, something is going wrong with Luke's footage, and something is actively hiding information from us. It's very intriguing and piqued my interest in the game as a whole a lot when I first played it, opening us up to something scary potentially in the real world, something happening to Luke directly. The next file is corrupted again, but the one after that is a brief vlog of Luke trying to record another pack opening of a random card game. Luke struggles to open the pack, looking very anxious and unwell, then says that he can't do this right now, rushing to stop the footage. The final file is corrupted as well, bringing us to the end of this group of videos. I really like this second sequence of recordings. The first sequence introduces us to the second-person narrative. This one deepens our connection to Luke and his struggle with trying to figure out what this game is outside of the game that he's playing, much like what is introduced to us in the binary messages with cryptic translations. The overarching story for Luke and his copy of the game is handled very well in my opinion, and we'll see some more of him soon. Luke replaces the battery for the camera and continues filming his playthrough, picking back up where we had left off, letting us pursue the next two scribes. First, we'll be going after Magnificus, the scribe of the magics, who paints his cards with a magical brush to bring them to life. Magnificus's temple is my favorite, but only because the puzzles inside are the most interesting, like the fight with the training dummy that plays specific painted sigils in order to reveal a combination needed to progress, or the next puzzle that breaks the fourth wall with each piece of the combination lock, asking you to loot a chest multiple times, enter a hidden room outside of the map boundaries, and even check your volume settings in the game's pause menu, which now has a sigil painted on top of it. These are really fun. These are the most engaging puzzles in Act 2 that ask you to think a little harder about the confines of what is inside the game, even twisting the rules a bit by including the pause menu. Little things like these make me appreciate Daniel Mullins as a developer even more. He's just willing to push the player into strange ideas outside of the norm for video games, and it's a lot of fun. What's not super fun is fighting Magnificus and his students, or at least using their cards wouldn't be very fun. They're actually really easy to beat in my opinion because of how weak and convoluted the cards feel to play. In order to use the magic set of cards, each card has to be charged by a resource card called a Mox, with 3 Mox colors, blue, orange, and green. If a Mox is in play, a battle card can be played as well, with each Mox color correlating to specific battle cards. So So, to play a blue mage, you must also play a blue mox. To play an orange golem, you also have to have an orange mox on the board. It might seem similar to the resources of blood points and bone tokens, but with having cards that are only affected by specific other cards, the minutia of playing certain colors and having to occupy board spaces with resources becomes overwhelming and really unfun. There might be some extremely powerful cards hidden in the Magic deck, but I'll never know because I don't think the setup is often worth the payout, especially compared to simpler cards like the Undead and Beast deck that can net you a win a lot faster. Moving along to Magnificus, entering his office at the top of the tower, we can find a note to Grimora that warns her that Poe's plan for a great transcendence could be bad for everyone, and that he must be stopped at any cost, though the note abruptly ends. Approaching the wizard, he asks if we understand what canvas we've been woven into, stating that as the player, we actually aren't part of this painting. We are the brush, moving with terrifying mastery. He tells us that he has a premonition, seeing a very grim future in his path, beginning the fight. And thankfully, I do think this is a pretty good boss fight to offset the boring battles against his cronies. On every card that we draw, Magnificus uses his brush to paint new sigils to affect our entire deck, even removing sigils we already have for new ones. I think this is really fun. It can create a lot of weird synergy and completely upset the balance you expected for your deck, acting as another knowledge check for these sigils to see if you understand how the cards are played. He does unfortunately seem to favor painting sigils that correlate to his deck of cards. Sorry buddy, you're not tricking me into using moxes, so that can be frustrating if you're avoiding his cards like me or if you don't completely understand them. Phase 2 of this fight continues with the same mechanic, though now Magnificus will repaint his own sigils too, which I think furthers that knowledge check on how the cards act. Now you also have to think about what his cards are suddenly doing. In this playthrough, I barely skated by with a win. Starvation had begun to set in, and I just got out enough damage to end the fight, which I think is largely due to the changeup of the sigils potentially giving me less useful ones than I would have liked. Again, giving me a lot of sigils that would pair nicely with magic cards, but I would rather have lost over and over than ever considering using those. As he's defeated, Magnificus tries to speak to us candidly, but exclaims that his eye begins to hurt, remembering that it was excised and taken from his body by Leshy. He says that while Leshy is simple-minded like his beasts, he would be far from the worst scribe to have complete control like he did before, then trying to warn us about a specific scribe, though the game corrupts and removes Magnificus from the room, ending the conversation. Which leaves us to pursue Poe, the scribe of technology. Entering his temple, he laughs at the deck we have, calling it weak and directing us to see why his employees are producing such weak cards for him. His temple consists of some really simple logic puzzles, combining numbers to create conduits to a specific sum. They're really easy and take maybe a few seconds to solve. Aside from Leshy's exploration puzzles that have you look around the scenery, these are definitely the weakest and don't have a layer of fun to help them out. They do, however, teach you a mechanic that correlates to the technology deck: conduits. The technology deck has two main mechanics: conduits and energy. Conduits are active when an energized card is placed and another energized card enters the board on another space, supercharging whatever card is between them to activate sigils or beef up the card's stats. Energy is what's needed to play tech cards, acting as their resource. Energy starts with one battery cell, then gaining another cell each turn for a maximum of 6, with your energy replenishing back to its current max level every turn. So if you have 4 energy cells and you use all 4, your next turn will come back with 5 cells. I like this as a resource just fine. Some of the tech cards cost 1 cell, so there's some strategizing with filling the board with lower cost cards until you can place a card with higher energy requirements, but I do feel like playing the tech cards is just a waiting game, which isn't very fun for me. You have to wait out however many turns it takes to play a card of high energy level, which sucks. If you want to play a card that needs 4 energy, I hope you can run the clock until the 4th turn of the match, which feels similar to why I don't care for Magnificus's deck too. You're just kind of playing for time and hoping that you can get a card that can be used, rather than the immediacy that you can play with the Beast and Undead cards. After a couple of logic puzzles and asking Poe's employees to put themselves directly on the production line for stronger cards, we're able to fight Poe. Despite his weaker deck and temple, I do like his boss fight. It's set on a conveyor belt with every card on the board rotating one spot to the left every turn, then on the leftmost and rightmost spaces swapping sides, changing who they're actively playing for. It's just fun. It makes you think about card placement more than usual, it forces you to interface with tech cards when they come from Poe, and it expects you to strategize further than the back row that you see incoming. I think this fight is the best boss in Act 2 because the conveyor belt mechanic is so engaging. It really keeps you on your toes. In Phase 2, the conveyor belt persists, but Poe decides that he wants to copy the player's best card on the board to every blank space left on the game board. He seems to just go after whatever card deals the most damage or has the most health, completely neglecting sigils sigils, which is a shame. I think that could lead to some real nasty surprises, especially since I had a Mantis guard with trifurcated attacks in play. He also gives the player 4 copies of that card, again, could be interesting, but it ended up scanning a pack rat for me, which I only really played to have some defense on the board. I like this twist for the boss fight a lot. You can really fuck yourself by playing something strong, but again, it might be in your favor eventually with a conveyor belt spinning it back your way soon. Poe mocks us for good RNG being the only reason we won, which, yeah, that's definitely part of winning in Act 2, and then mocks us for the decision we made on which scribe we want to replace. I'm sure he has a witty line if we want to replace him, but I've never seen it. Now we need to go back to the scribe monoliths, checking in now that all 4 are activated. We're told again to choose which scribe we want to replace, which still doesn't affect anything major, so I still go with Leshy. With our choice, Leshy appears in front of us and tells us that we're making a poor decision in pursuing his power, telling us that he has no idea what he could have created if he stayed in his position. He calls out to Poe, saying that he knows that Poe was the one to set in play the plan to take over the game again from the previous act, and Poe appears. Poe seems to remove Leshy from the game and takes over the story, forcing us into a boss fight with him, telling us that normally we would fight the scribe that we chose to replace, but today, Poe has different plans for us. This isn't really a boss fight, it's a fake out on the player. The fight begins as normal, though on Poe's 3rd turn, he plays a corrupted card on the board. Any action on or from the card begins to corrupt the game, with Poe gloating about his plan in motion, and the game begins to reset again, uploading Poe's restore point and bringing us into the next act of the story. Act 2 leaves me with a lot of mixed feelings, and I definitely see it as a low point for the game as a whole, which I know isn't a unique stance to have, but it's a common thought for a reason. Thrusting a player into the 16-bit adventure that was drawn into the presentation of the first act can turn a lot of people off. The manual deck and its constant RNG, or random number generation to refer to randomness in a game, that you have to rely on for your resources can be a huge hurdle in the difficulty, while the puzzles and exploration throughout the entire act are largely hit or miss, and even the good puzzles can be a little too simple. But the expansion of the game that you thought you knew is great. I've played the game with friends once before, and the entire shift into a new game is a great moment for a first playthrough. The art style for this act is nothing short of fantastic, with its perfect translation from Act 1 and the extreme charm that can be seen in every spray and pixel. I do appreciate the attempt to have unique mechanics for each of the scribe's cards, but that can also feel extremely overwhelming to a player that might not have knowledge for similar games, or one that can't retain all the mechanics running simultaneously, as much as you can try to ignore the ones you don't want to use. The boss fights are still great though, with fun, interesting systems in each that let you break the game in your favor, or at least give you an engaging fight if it's not going well for you, which helps keeps the constant card fights interesting, because I do think 3 mandatory fights where you have to partially relearn the game before each boss can feel like a slog, even if you don't have a full reset when you lose. Act 2 is a constant flow of ups and downs for me, not nearly as strong in gameplay and presentation as Act 1, and not as narratively interesting as what we're about to get into with Act 3. What the fuck am I playing right now? We fade into a close-up of Poe's monitor, a smug face looking down on the player while he waits for us to wake up from the game reset. All we're able to do is begin Poe's new game, landing us in Bottopia on a digital game board projected from a tablet. Poe tells us that his game world was once a great technological paradise, though now it's been taken over by Uberbots, a name he makes up on the spot, adding that we don't need motivation to take them down because we only need the game to start the Great Transcendence. 2 important things are being established here. One I think players will latch onto, the mention of the Great Transcendence, and the other that might fly under the radar for now being that Poe doesn't have an elaborate game set up for us. We'll learn more about the Great Transcendence in a bit towards the end of the act, but I want to focus on Poe's lack of preparation in the game he has for the player because I think it's a genius bit of storytelling. Poe does not care about this game. He just wants to stall for time and use the player to fill in the blanks that he can't be bothered to do himself, which we'll see soon in him asking us to add details to his world, create bosses and cards ourselves, and very weak attempts at world building to try and mimic the care that Leshy had for his game. I love how ill-prepared Poe is and how he only cares about combat in his game, wanting to see results through our progress and not caring about the player experience whatsoever. It's a great bit of commentary on games that try to copy other titles' formulas without having that extra bit of soul soul that creates a memorable experience, and I think Poe is a great character to drive us through that idea. Consistently, all we've seen of Poe is his results-oriented mind, wanting his workers in Act 2 to provide him with better cards at the cost of their bodies, not caring about the other 2 sentient cards in Act 1, and we were warned by Magnificus that someone worse than Leshy could take over. If not himself and Grimora, then that points to Poe, someone that doesn't have a passion for the design of his games, and someone that just wants to see his plan succeed. His plan being what Magnificus was likely warning us about, but I think you can interpret that from the note along with his lack of game design skill. I really love this third act because of what it's saying alongside Act 1. Without seeing the kind of game we could be playing, Act 3 would be much weaker, but since we got to see that parallel of ambiance, storytelling, and rich detail compared to the cold, empty, and loosely framed world here, it's fantastic, again giving us another layer to the narrative beyond what we're actively playing and being told, weaving it seamlessly into the experience as a whole. Though despite Poe's lack of world building and his stolen design choices, he does introduce a bit of core card gameplay, so let's get into that as we'll mostly be playing the game with the story only peeking through towards the end of Act 3. The 2 biggest changes in Poe's card game gives us a 5th lane in combat, opening the board up to more cards in play, and his resource for cards, using the energy cell mechanic that we saw in Act 2. The 5th lane in combat doesn't really change a whole lot for me honestly, and I spoke a bit on the energy cells before, but to cover my bases, let's review. At the beginning of an encounter, you have 1 energy cell, with that total increasing every round of the game up to a max of 6, which then replenishes to your maximum available energy every turn, meaning if you've got 4 energy cells and you spend all 4 in one round, the next round you'll have a full battery at 5 cells for you to play. The resource management here is pretty straightforward. You'll always have a card to start with that requires 1 energy, your empty vessels, more on these guys in a bit, so you will at least have something to get on the board at all times while you wait for more expensive cards to become available. But therein lies my issue with the resources for this act. It's a lot of waiting until you can play the right cards. With Leshy's blood values, at least you can get useful cards out immediately for aggressive play, and then double down on the next round if you want to get an even stronger card ready. Here in Act 3, you just have to wait and play weaker cards until the better cards are ready to go in the 4th round and onward. Maybe this gripe comes from my lack of familiarity with card games, but I don't really enjoy having to wait until I can play stronger cards that will get me better results. At least with the blood values, I can build up a strong offense immediately if I play smart and get a little lucky with my top deck. Here, I just have to wait. I do appreciate the thought that went into having a unique mechanic for resource management, but I just don't enjoy the waiting. It's really that simple. I mentioned them above, but the empty vessels that you can play for 1 energy cell are at least made somewhat interesting, thankfully, since you're forced to play them in almost every encounter. Throughout Act 3, you'll slowly upgrade these empty vessels with sigils which are always active when they're played, like the Sharp Quill sigil that reflects 1 damage when a card is struck, giving them something of an offensive component. I do really like this. It does make the waiting game until later rounds more bearable, and it adds a bit of strategy in how you play your empty vessels, allowing you to use them aggressively instead of just tanking damage and filling the board for those stronger cards to replace them, making the upgrades a smart consideration against the forced waiting. Combat in Act 3 does feel much slower with the base of these resources, which is unfortunate and kind of feels at odds with Poe's narrative of wanting to play results-based gameplay over a thoughtful experience, though it does play into his stalling for time while he completes his plan, and maybe his lack of game design skill, so I'm a little lost on how to feel about the slower pace and consideration to the act as a whole, but for the core gameplay experience, I definitely do not like it. Some other smaller changes in gameplay that Poe adds are more expansions on what Leshy established in his game, like new sigils, different events on the world map like a card editor, or vendors that you can find throughout Botopia. A big change though is your flow of progression. In Act 1, if you failed 2 fights, you were sent all the way back to the beginning. In Act 2, you could retry fights as many times as you wanted with no punishment. Act 3 kind of meets these 2 in the middle and creates checkpoints, called waypoints, throughout the game map that you'll be sent to on death, though the progress that you made up until that checkpoint persists. Only anything after the waypoint will be reset, creating a Souls-like bonfire mechanic where you do make constant progression but will be pushed backwards only slightly on death. Another thing that Act 3 borrows with this bonfire mechanic is dropping the money that you've built up where you died, with you earning currency through overdamage in fights like before. I do like this middle ground between the hard reset of Act 1 and the 0 penalty that we got before. Again, it lets you feel a sense of progression consistently while still punishing you if you make some mistakes, though not too much with an entire game over. Is anything happening in the story yet? No, not really. Damn. Well, that is kind of the point, right? Poe doesn't have anything prepared for us, he's making this up as we go. He doesn't even have a linear structure for how we approach the Uberbots he needs us to defeat, letting us go for them in almost any order. Which, I guess, leads me to talking about those Uberbots. They serve as our boss fights in Bottopia, representing each scribe from Act 2, and I think they're the best fights in the game both mechanically and as really exciting fun moments. Again, you can take them on in any order. I think you technically have a choice between only 2 at first, but after one of those is defeated, the other 3 are free reign, so whatever the hell that means for you. Let's go through the order I fought them for this playthrough, starting with the Archivist. The Archivist, representing Grimora, uses files from the player's actual computer to create cards and points for the fight. In the first phase, the boss plays the Librarian cards that, when killed, will have the player access files on their computer to represent points for the scale, with larger files giving out higher damage to the opponent's scale. Naturally, as the YouTuber narcissist that I am, I chose footage that I had already captured for this video and some old footage that I haven't archived yet from the last one, both giving out a hefty amount of damage to move us along to Phase 2. Phase 2 asks you to pick a file that can show its age, the oldest file you can find, one that you cherished and have kept for a long time. Unfortunately, I built this computer about 2 years ago, and I'm not exactly the sentimental type, so I don't have anything super old to throw in here. I think I used a wallpaper engine file that was created when I set the PC up, but the older the file you choose, the more powerful of a card will be created, which is what you'll want as the Archivist threatens to permanently delete the file if it's killed in combat. Obviously, legally, the game can't do that. I think it'd technically be malware at that point, but I do think it's really funny to threaten your computer's security just for the sake of a boss fight. Again, adding to that strange charm that Daniel Mullins brings to his game design on top of using the size of files in the first place. The fight itself isn't particularly engaging outside of these 2 gimmicks, but they're very unique, so it stands out and makes up for the less interesting opponents on the board, complementing the overall bizarre nature of the game and the fourth wall breaks that we've seen so far. Speaking of the fourth wall, it's time to check in on Luke. As we finish this first boss, his camera memory card is full, and as Luke presumably swaps the card out, we're greeted with his internal storage again. For the first video in this set, we see Luke recording a quick vlog in his car after finding the Inscryption cards at a garage sale, saying that he doubts the lady selling them knew how much they were worth and that he's excited to film the pack opening soon. Next, Luke records himself calling the woman that he bought the cards from, someone he refers to as Mrs. Hobbs. Hobbs mentions that the cards belong to her deceased daughter, Casey, who passed away a long time ago. Mrs. Hobbs also adds that Casey worked for Game Funa, working on Inscryption before she passed. Luke ends the call asking if he can call her back when she has more information, and the video ends. The third file shows Luke reading through articles about a fire at Game Funa's headquarters, where Luke learns that Casey was the only fatality in the fire while she was working late one night on the digital game of Inscryption. At the mention of the name Game Funa, the footage distorts and Luke seems to notice, staring directly at the camera. The next video has Luke reading more about articles, though he doesn't read anything out loud and nothing can really be discerned from the footage. We can see that Luke has gotten into a bit of a rabbit hole with his research, with his desk cluttered in notes along with multiple books and pages strewn all over the place. The footage distorts again, and Luke reaches for the camera as he notices. While this video is creepy and it adds to the mystery of what happened to Luke, I think this one is more for the overall ARG that I mentioned before, with the sticky notes on Luke's desk probably being a clue for something. I don't know, just a hunch. The next file is corrupted, but the one after that is pretty juicy. The video opens with Luke speaking into the camera, seemingly in bed late at night, and saying that someone is inside of his home. He says he left his phone in the other room, so he wants this video to be used as evidence if anything happens, and as he opens the door, the video ends. The seventh file is more ARG material, a mostly corrupted file, though there are a few visible frames of a sticky note with an encrypted message. The final video this time around is mostly corrupted, though we get brief glimpses of Luke laughing maniacally while playing with a scale similar to the one we can find inside the game. The focus of this set of videos is mostly the ARG, I think, which is fine. The whole game is complemented by that ARG mystery, but we are getting some development on what's happening to Luke. Diving deeper into this mystery game is clearly having some effect on him, and we're learning more about where it came from, potentially being the last-ditch effort to get rid of the game from a deceased Game Funa employee, Casey, who we can learn a little more about in the ARG. Getting back to Poe's game, I fought the photographer next, here in place of Leshy. I think this is the weakest of the 4 fights that we'll see, only because it lacks a more memorable moment that the other 3 do have. At the end of every player turn, the photographer will offer to take a picture of the game board for the player, creating a restore point for the fight that you can opt into reverting to every turn, or allowing you to take a new photo for a new restore point. Once you've restored to the photo once, it's deleted and you can choose to take another photo or pass on creating a restore point. This mechanic is fun, and I definitely abused it to win the fight, but it doesn't have that extra oomph like I said before, on top of it being pretty one-sided for the player's advantage, which makes the fight kinda easy. If you can create a restore point that's in your favor, absolutely nothing is stopping you from using it and cancelling out whatever the boss just played against you. Then you can just take a new picture and create a new restore point for you to cheat again. On top of that, phase 2 of the fight doesn't introduce anything else, just having the boss play stronger cards, I think. So the core mechanic with the photograph is good and I really like it. The fight itself just doesn't feel as grandiose without a weirder element to it, making it the weakest fight in Act 3 for me. Next, I fought the unfinished boss, here to represent Magnificus. This fight plays on the fact that Poe didn't think out the game fully and expects the player to come up with rules for the fight to be imposed on us throughout it. This one is really fun. You can decide what happens between each turn, when you play a card or when a card dies. Then choose a stipulation to follow that rule, and you can create some weird combinations to keep the game board interesting and honestly difficult for the entire fight. Phase 2 asks you to create a second rule, adding to the difficulty of the fight, and if the encounter goes on long enough, you'll even get to add a third rule. On this playthrough, I also found a funny sequence where if a rule is played too many times, Poe decides that it's unfair and just removes it outright, which is great. He cheats just like Leshy, even though he criticizes him for that. I like this boss fight a lot. It plays into the overall narrative framing with lazy game design from Poe, and it can really make for a hard uphill battle against whatever rules you impose on yourself. Most of the rules are definitely playing against you, so it's fun to try and find the best route possible that still nets you a win, like destroying a random card on the board every time you play a new card, which can slowly chip away at the boss's cards while deleting yours just as often. It's a really silly moment to ask the player to create their own boss fight, and having the game master be so indifferent on what they made, it just makes for a more memorable fight. Lastly, we fight Golly, here in Poe's place. Golly links themselves up to the internet to use the web to create cards, pulling results off of a search engine to make new cards in the fight, like a mole card, then pulling your Steam friends in to make cards of their profiles. I don't know exactly what goes into the Steam profile cards. I would assume it's just randomly assigning stats to your friends, but Ellie, if you're watching this, fuck you cost me a good attempt against this boss. In the second phase, Golly clears the board and asks us to create a custom card using the card builder we can find throughout Act 3, letting us pick a card's core stats, some sigils, and even designing the image and letting us choose a name. I haven't mentioned the card builder yet because I am really trying to not bloat this section of the video with just gameplay commentary, but I like the card builder a lot. When you find the card builder in the overworld, you have to sacrifice one of your cards first to give you an allotment of points used to generate the new card's stats, with more points needed for better core stats and adding sigils. It's a neat concept and you can really make some broken stuff. I accidentally made Mr. Shoot Thing here, not at all realizing how powerful it would be, and it let me clean up any fight once he was drawn. I do want to break this card down fully because I didn't even realize what I had made at first, and I want this to emphasize how fun it can be to synergize the sigils with certain cards throughout the entire game. I gave it 0 attack power and 1 health for a low energy cost, then adding the Brittle sigil that kills a card whenever it attacks another to raise how many points I could spend on the card, and then adding the Sentry sigil that attacks any card that moves in front of it, finally adding the Poison sigil that kills anything in 1 attack. What I didn't realize is that since it's technically attacking from the Sentry sigil, it isn't attacking to trigger the Brittle sigil, destroying the card so it never dies, on top of killing everything in 1 hit thanks to the extra points from the 0 attack damage and the Poison sigil. I honestly did not know what I was cooking here. I laughed at the game reacting to a powerful card being created and was genuinely shocked once I realized what I had in my deck. Back to the boss fight though. For this second phase, we're building a card for another player that Golly is going to send to them for us. I don't really know what happens here. Since I had to do this fight twice, I got to see 2 different results. The first time, Golly failed to find anyone to send the card to, and I was given the card in my hand to fight against her and some more of my Steam friends. The second time though, Golly successfully linked with another player, and it led to a ridiculously long sequence of Golly narrating how the player used my card and if they succeeded in the fight. I think the successful connection is just randomly decided when phase 2 begins, and I think the other player winning or losing the fight is another step in randomization, so phase 2 can either be really dull and over quickly or really dull and take too long. Phase 2 of this fight is really hampered by what happens with the other player, again becoming a needlessly long exchange for a fake fight or an anticlimactic shift into fighting more of the same cards, which is a shame because the basis of this fight using the internet is really fun. The Steam friend cards are a funny surprise, and I would have loved to see more cards using search engine results, maybe giving us some weirder ones to play into the ARG or something, or really anything other than what's here in phase 2, because as it stands, either nothing happens or nothing happens for 3 minutes straight. If this really is reliant on an actual live connection to another player, then please tell me I'm wrong about all of this in the comments, and that I just had bad luck with this fight because the second phase really drags down the encounter. Finally, with all of the Uberbots defeated, Poe tells us that the Great Transcendence is finally at hand. He asks us to go through the game world back to the start where we can find another scribe monolith that the Uberbots activated. As we walk back through the map, Poe gets a security alert that one of the cameras inside of his base has been disabled, asking us to get up from the table to go investigate. Much like Leshy's cabin, we can get up from the table and poke around fixed camera points to look around Poe's base of operations. And much like the cabin, there's some stuff to find for more gameplay items and hidden interactions. I don't have a whole lot to add. There's a bit more content for the ARG again and some simple puzzles to solve. Not much for me to comment on, but I could be missing something. What we're here to find is a room in the back of the building, activating a computer that seems to pull us into another room. We're greeted by 3 pairs of eyes, their face then lit by a candle held by Leshy, showing us him, Grimora, and Magnificus attempting to contact us. The 3 tell the player that they've put aside their differences to stop Poe's great transcendence, specifying that it will be for the greater good. Magnificus asks if any goodwill will come from what they're planning to do, and the other 2 ask him to trust them. Leshy says that we have to keep playing this game a little longer to distract Poe for the 3 scribes to strike at the right moment, sending us back to Poe's base to take him down. Getting back to the table, Poe asks why we didn't bother fixing the camera after he gave us such a great card game, then admitting that it doesn't really matter once the Great Transcendence has been completed. We continue back to the Scribe Monolith, and once we reach it, Poe begins to reveal his big plan. As a show of power, Poe streams Luke his live webcam feed, showing us Luke playing the game who quickly tries to cover the camera, with Poe now addressing Luke directly. I don't know about you, but this would have had me closing the game entirely, so props to Luke for pressing on. Poe tells Luke that the Great Transcendence has been part of Poe's plan to finish Inscryption as a game, using our files from the archivist, the photos from the photographer, and the encounters we created to upload everything to the internet through the connection that we allowed Poe to use on our computer. Poe brags about being the smartest scribe, saying that even if they reset the game again, the one that we've allowed him to upload will always exist, allowing him to be in control of most copies of the game that will exist. As he begins to upload to digital storefronts, Leshy rips his head off. Seriously, he just goes for it and kills Poe right here. The 3 scribes gather around to thank us for helping them stop Poe and ask us to reset the game again using the new game button on the main menu. Grimora notices that she has full file access to our computer and takes the opportunity to go against the other scribes, deleting Inscryption's data from the floppy disk that Luke found. Leshy and Magnificus question this decision, saying that she's doomed to everything, but she says that it's for the best to stop their endless fight amongst each other, along with the chance to delete something far more sinister than them hidden in the files of the game. The game slowly begins to delete itself, and as Grimora says goodbye to the others, we reset again. I really enjoy Act 3, though I could understand if other players find it to be grating and see it as overstaying its welcome. I think with the context of the game being created by Poe and his disregard for coherent game design, his constant feature creep and bloat of mechanics, the lack of a decent story, it all comes together for me to create an extremely unique commentary and critique of iterative design and game development as a whole. It's supposed to be overcomplicated and feel rushed and lack that satisfaction of the love and care that Leshy put into his game, and I think it nails what it's going for here. And as something to actually play, I think it's still pretty fun. There's a lot of new mechanics to represent Poe's constant reuse of other scribes' ideas, like Magnificus's gems making an appearance, and while you can engage with everything if you want to, it can be ignored for the core card game that's still good, despite the new resource management. The addition of new sigils, the card creator, the items that you can unlock, it's all a lot of fun with the core game, which is impressive that it can maintain that enjoyment while trying to force a meta-narrative of messy game design. And maybe it's a happy accident that I see Act 3 in this light. Maybe the feature creep was real and Daniel Mullins is getting away with it in my eyes, but I love Act 3 because of the sum of its parts. As a whole, it's a very unique and fun experience to bookend the narrative before we get into the finale proper. The ending of Inscryption moves pretty quickly, so with that, let's get right into it and talk about it as it wraps up, rather than stopping and starting over and over. After the game is reset and the deletion begins, we enter Grimora's game, greeted with a gravestone. In the room, we find 3 different headers to place on the stone, one for Luke, one for Poe, and the correct answer, Inscryption. As the epitaph is finished for Inscryption's grave, Grimora is revealed to be waiting deeper in the tomb. We approach her table and begin her game, with her lamenting that we could have had a lot of fun if she got her turn. Her game map is a chessboard, with our token moving in each square while opposing tokens pursue us through the board, moving as we do. We find a chest, get some bone cards, and begin our first encounter against Grimora. As the fight begins, she reveals her reasoning for deleting the game from inside. She says that there is a dire need for the game to be deleted, that hidden deep in the data of the disk is something truly evil, prompting us to begin the fight. Grimora's game is very similar to Leshy's, though now only using bone tokens without any other resource. We play skeleton cards with no bone requirement to build up more bones as our weaker cards die to then play higher bone token cards. As we finish the match, Grimoire congratulates Luke on the victory, confirming that she learned who he is when looking through the files to delete the game. She begins to question why he's been researching the Carnoffel code, again a part of the larger Inscryption ARG, but stops herself before she says the name and continues with the game to not speak on it further, though warning Luke about proceeding with his investigation. We continue through her game board, reaching a boss at the end of the map. Grimoire puts on a mask to take on a pirate persona, but as the environment joins her performance, the mask is deleted and Grimoire realizes that she's running out of time. As Grimoire's game is deleted, she reaches out to the player for a final handshake, accepting her death. From Grimoire's game, we get another reset, this time to a familiar setting, back at Leshy's table. Leshy is surprised to see that he hasn't been deleted yet and disappointed that the game didn't go his way, though asking us to play one more match against him. We're given the deck we finished Act 1 with, and Leshy congratulates us on a game well played from before. As we play our hand, Leshy compliments our plays and longs for more time to play, holding on to the game that he created. We continue to fight, and Leshy still reflects on the last few hours, from the excitement of waking up to play in Act 1, and his surprise that we wanted to replace him in Act 2, though he forgives us for our actions to put things in the past. Eventually, the pieces of his game board start being deleted, but Leshy wants to continue playing for the love of the game. Leshy warns us about things on the Inscryption disc that are not meant to be seen, and asks that we continue to play despite not being able to keep score, as he feels the end for him is approaching. As his cards are deleted, he accepts his death and congratulates us on another good game, extending his hand to shake the players, and we're reset again, greeted by Magnificus. The corruption and deletion through Magnificus's game is much worse than what we've encountered through Grimoire's and Leshy's, with most of the world already being deleted and objects disappearing as we approach the wizard. He asks Luke why he can't just eject the disc now and spare him, but he has already seen the future and knows that Luke will not eject the disc. Magnificus's battle begins with a dual disc slotting onto the player's arm, an ancient-looking piece of equipment to summon cards and play them in battle. Magnificus's game entirely focuses around his moxes, using colored gems to power specific classes of cards to battle, like a Ruby Mox to play and power an Orange Mage. 400 health points for the player and him to send behind Magnificus as his scale has already been deleted and we begin the fight. After our opening turn, Magnificus asks Luke if he feels remorse about deleting the game that is their entire existence, though accepting that nothing lasts forever and continuing the fight. As the game is deleted, Magnificus struggles to accept his death, seemingly trying to fight back against the deletion, but the game has already gone too far and getting more unplayable as we continue. Eventually, everything is gone except for Magnificus, and as he's deleted, he crawls to the player to shake our hand, but he gets removed before he can reach us. With every game now deleted, we're left with nothing but the base of Inscryption, the 2D card adventure that we saw back in Act 2. Nothing is left on the game except for the Woodcarver, who tells us that the only thing that remains on the disc now is the old data, warning us not to access it, then being deleted themselves. As we wander the empty game, we eventually come across another corrupted card. Clicking on it activates something, unpacking the old data and corrupting the game even further. Suddenly, we hear Luke outside of the game, screaming as the old data takes over his screen. We then see Luke trying to destroy the disc on his desk, and the footage fades to black. Sometime later, the footage cuts in again with Luke recording himself on a phone call with a local news organization, trying to expose Game Funa and crack what happened when he played Inscryption. The call is interrupted with a knock at Luke's door, and when he brings the camera with him to answer, he's shot and killed by Amanda. The camera falls to the floor, and we see Amanda enter the house as Luke's blood pools around him. As this footage ends, the credits begin. Alright, a lot to unpack there, but like I said, it moves pretty quickly and I didn't want to do a disservice to the momentum of the ending. I love the finale of Inscryption. It's emotional, it's mysterious, it's one final climax before the credits roll. Getting to see the other two scribes' visions for the game is fantastic. It's powerful seeing how desperate each of them are to cling to their games, and I love how committed Mullins was in fleshing out even glimpses of those worlds. Leshy's final moments are always my favorite part of the ending, the way he doesn't care about the score, just wanting to play for the sake of playing, reinforcing his love for the player experience above anything else. It really just gets me a little emotional. It's sad to see his game coming apart, even if it was a piece of something evil. And I really enjoy the setup for the larger mystery for the player to uncover, the secret behind the old data that's teased right at the end. Something so horrible that Luke had to destroy the disc, something that got him killed, something that couldn't even be shown to the player. It really is a great hook for a deeper journey if you're at all interested, which again is out of the scope for this video, but I highly recommend taking a look into it for yourself, and again, I will be linking a video in the description if you want a full breakdown that I would recommend. Inscryption is a wonderful and bizarre game made with love for the genre, the industry, and game development as a whole that manages to bleed passion and love into every aspect of its design, visuals, and storytelling. It's one of my favorite games that I look forward to replaying every once in a while because it still manages to surprise me with secrets around every corner, contingencies for the weirdest quirks you can have in your deck, and more of that passion hidden everywhere you look. I hate card games, but I love Inscryption. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far in the video, consider subscribing to see more from me in the future. Next up will be a video on Wolfenstein: The New Colossus to continue my coverage of machine games run with the Wolfenstein franchise. Following that will probably be another random game just to kind of give me a break from covering Wolfenstein. Then following those two, I will be wrapping up Wolfenstein with Young Blood, but who knows what I'll be making after that. If you're unfamiliar with the ends of my videos, I do these kind of unscripted sequences just to kind of talk about the production of the video and some notes that I want to include if you have questions about what I talked about or what I didn't talk about, which I'm guessing you might if you like the Inscryption ARG and you're wondering why a long-ass video didn't even bother covering it at all. Firstly, on that point, I do like the Inscryption ARG. I think it's fun. I think it's a really cool way to interact with your community. That's all fine and dandy. I just don't think it would be... It just felt a little disingenuous for me to try and cover it because I would just be following someone else's footsteps in how they solved it. There's a version of this script where I did do that, and it just didn't feel right to me to just kind of copy exactly what someone else was doing. So I just didn't want to close out my video with like, hey, this is how this guy did this, and I'm going to do it and pretend that I'm doing it too and we're following along, and it just didn't feel right to me, so I didn't want that to be part of the video, really, so I didn't want to cover the ARG in this. I also kind of think that the ARG kind of detracts from the game as a whole, but that's just me. I think it kind of goes to weird and wacky places that maybe are a little too silly and wacky for what the game kind of was shooting for in the game itself. But that's just me. Inscryption heads, don't come after me, please. You also might be wondering why I didn't talk about Casey's mod, a mini expansion that came with the game a couple months after it released, and it's because I don't really care about it. I mentioned it somewhere towards the beginning of the video in Act 1, but I don't really like roguelikes, and Casey's mod is just a roguelike mode for the game, keeping you in Act 1 and letting you replay Act 1 as much as you want. Again, there is a version of this script that did include Casey's mod. I have like 8 hours of footage of me playing Casey's mod, but at the end of the script, just kind of wrapping up on a nice note about loving Inscryption despite, not really enjoying card games, just kind of felt right. And I felt like talking about another game mode that is just more card game kind of detracted from that point. It kind of would feel like I'm forcing myself to play this when I don't really enjoy it. So that is why I didn't talk about the ARG and I didn't talk about Casey's mod, if you're wondering, which you might be when you see a really long video about Inscryption and it doesn't even talk about the secondary game mode or the ARG. I kind of just want to focus on the game itself, And for one final note before closing out this video, just kind of a clerical thing, I guess, for people that are keeping up with the channel and my uploads. I won't be uploading anything for the month of December. My schedule doesn't really work with working on a video for the month of December, so I will be backlogging 2 uploads for the month of January, so you should be seeing 2 videos from me, which will of course be Wolfenstein: The New Colossus somewhere at the beginning or middle of the month, and then something else later at the end of January, so look out for those if you're interested. Thanks again so much for watching, and I hope to see you for the next video in 2026. Oh, Jesus, 2026 feels weird to say out loud. I do not like that.